How's it going?
It's going, it's interesting. I've gotten up to module 4. Um, interesting, the slicing and dicing genres, subgenres, why is you know,
Mm.
and the and song. Because when Kitchen was writing his compositions, the term pan song was new. I think that came about, from my recollection, around the time when well, that's about in early 2000s or somewhere around there, right? With
And
um
it became a legitimate, how to put it? It is a practice that got named a lot later.
right, yes. So
So,
there's a thing I tell people when part, well, as what I see as part of the challenge with, I guess, not only discuss all these various genres and the constant dissecting of calypso into soca, then we have raga soca, and then EDM, this, right? And all this slicing and dicing. And there was a time when a calypso, a 10 song, was a road mat song, was a pan song. Simple. And at that time, I think there was a lot more cohesion in the whole vibe of the carnival, because the music permeated everywhere. The same songs were everywhere. And then when 10 songs became 10 songs, so now, no, you ain't no 10 song, no party, right? And then even when your party songs now and road mat songs. So you have songs you're more likely to hear in a party that you wouldn't hear on the road. And
right.
of course, the pan song became its own thing, and nobody told the Fosto that he was supposed to leave room for the arranger to arrange music, right? You know?
And I know that's it's, how to put it? The differentiation came as we needed the music to do different, really different things, right? Um, so you get, for example, by the 2000s, people like Super Blue going in the and I got this from, let me acknowledge my source. People like Martin Raymond would tell you this. Super Blue would go in the studio, and every year he's just trying to get the BPM faster and faster and faster until you have a definite breakaway between soca, which we just call soca, and then power soca. So when we named it power soca, we went back and named the older fashioned groovy soca. Right now, groovy soca is morphing into what I would call Caribbean pop. So people like Kes, for example, where I don't want to sound biased, but it's the slower pace soca. It's meant for parties, meant to grind. Not that you can't do that on the street. There's this perception now that it has to be fast for the street or not. But traditionally, it was chipping,
Right.
right, and not jumping all over the place. Our party music, the Lego music, was chipping. And then with the advent of or the exposure to, rather, to especially people like Burning Flames, we started moving faster and faster. And when you listen to Burning Flames songs, even coming out, so the songs when we would have been most exposed to them, late 90s into early 2000s, coming forward, they had a faster pace than us. And we started, with people like Super Blue and others, started speeding up until we came up with our own version of power soca. Now, it's not to say speed wasn't always there with people like Maestro and so on, who had a very kind of frenetic pace coming out of borrowing from disco, I suppose, if you want to put it that way.
Well, Dr. Francis, can I share something with you?
Mm-hmm.
So when I joined Traffic in 1992, right, I was the programmer percussionist, right? So I was the first guy lasted maybe a month or so before I came in. And when I came in, the bandita told me, okay, when you playing this type of music, we're playing at between 110 and like 115. And the party songs, right, is 123. And if things really get going, we can go to 125, right? So that's my instructions, right? So, and that's how I conducted myself, right? And then as time went on and I became more comfortable in the role, I remember specifically at a mass camp gig, you know, I took the band to 130. No, nobody asked me to do that. Right? I just felt it was holding back and I just put the BPM up to 130. And after the band played, the band leader Andy Joseph asked me, Neil, what tempo was that? So I was a little bit apprehensive because my instructions was, hey, 125 is, you know what I'm saying? So I say, well, 130. He said, what? That feel good, boy. That feel good, right? And then I started doing that, right? Then 130 became 132. And then I was George. The first man come and say, Neil, what tempo you do that song at? And I tell him tempo. And some Douglas come and ask me the same thing, Neil, what tempo that was you doing? Ajala come and ask me the same thing. And then Kenny Phillip, who was the man in them days, right, complained to me. He said, Neil, you play them song too fast. He said, oh, let me now come in studio and they want to go faster and faster. Right? I'm saying that to say, being in this program, I'm thinking about history, and I'm hesitant to insert myself, right? Because nobody researched the topic. But being there, I'm remembering what I did. I remember what Calypsonians like Iowa, Ajala, Anselm Douglas, right? I remember even playing for with Shadow, right? And, you know, pushing his tempo. And Shadow was the most particular man when it came to playing his music, right? You go to rehearsal, the drummer playing it, the drummer and the bass man, keyboard man do what you want to do, brass man do what you want to do, but you see my pattern, Mr. Drummer, play my pattern and the bass man, right? But so you're saying these things about Super Blue, right? And I'm thinking Super Blue, everybody was influencing everybody, because when Iowa was one of the first men who people noticed was playing song faster. Though I hesitate to say, I remember our conversations, and then I remember Kenny Phillip complaining to me about playing the songs too fast, and then complaining that kind of, and then when the song fast, when I remember when Ajala did Horsey Degree, everybody was like, what the hell? We couldn't play that song no faster than it was recorded. Because the song itself was so fast that they tried to put more speed on Horsey Degree was a waste of time. Horsey Degree, we had to play that as recorded because I think that was close to 160 already, something like that. Right? So in terms of, I just share that with you because you're talking, and I remember in this time in my life as a young musician, programmer, interacting with these guys, you know, and being involved in these whole things. And yeah, anyway, so I just thought I would say that.
It's good information because, like I said, that story with Super Blue was from a specific producer.
Martin, yeah.
Yes, and yes, as you said, there's no real in-depth research on soca. We came up with a national myth and we stick with it, and that's it. We don't have to do any more, right? But there are, like, for me, I think one of the markers of that major shift when everyone started really paying attention to the speed was in 2000 when Iowa George and Super Blue tied for Road March. And Rachel Price actually had this is how it came into my consciousness really, because I just thought, yeah, it was fast and you jump up and you're done. Didn't think about it back then. But Rachel Price had an act where she talked about it, right? And she's like, what is he doing? He's killing the culture. And so you're hearing in popular culture this sudden understanding that there's a shift in tempo.
but there was also too Dr. Francis, a shift in his style, because again I remember playing music for these fets, because there were so many fets now, right? So the Road March used to be the thing, but then the fets and everybody in one spot, and then there's a different way you could use rhythm and stuff when you're going up and down, as opposed to propelling people through the streets for hours and hours and hours is a different way, right? And I think a lot of the so that party soca became a slice of now what soca. So there's party songs, fet songs, and then there was what songs that would play on the road. You know, so I think there's that too with regards to soca. But yeah, sorry to...
So do you think it's collapsing? Because, I mean, with the controversy with Savannah Grass, for example, now, back in India, as you said, that energy to propel you forward and make you chip was a slower pace.
Right.
That, you know, the natural reaction or the call and response from your body was to chip and swing. And that is something you can do for hours moving, and you won't realize you're moving. But with a faster pace, like family, for example, family come, you jump up, you mash up, you even know what you're doing, because that I think is actually booyah. It's a mix between booyah and jab jab, right? That is supposed to send you outside of yourself. So you're not really sure what you're doing.
And that is what
when you're done.
That is what these guys were after. Iowa George in particular was always after the moment in the fet, in front of the stage, right? As it became known as the forward, right? So when he had songs like Hannah and them kind of things, where people waist down, but these were very powerful, excuse, in the fet context, right? And show me your palm, show me your hand, I want to read your palm, all the different kind of things. All the artists became focused on that explosive reaction, the forward, and then most people interpret that as an instruction. And that is what, so I think my personal theory is that the trying to find the formula is what killed everything. People were not really being creative and trying to write good songs. People mistake Iowa Georgia, Iowa Super Blue, and their singular talent to do things the way they follow them, they can be in trouble. Because they know what it is they're doing. Iowa George is a science for Iowa George that he understands the way he does it. But when you try to follow them, you're going to be in problem, because you just scraping on the surface. You don't understand where that's coming from, how the mechanisms work in their mind.
You can try.
Yeah, but it is a failure all the time. It is a failure, and this is...
He went Road March by copying that Jump and Wave was just like he kidnapped Super Blue and made him write a song for him. That's just what it sounded like, right? And it swept because the people... Role has an interesting essay on this where he talks about ritual soca and the ritual of soca. And people sometimes don't understand that soca is meant to get you to that apotheosis. From even when we're looking at the old road marches coming down, that almost monastic chanting that they did, if you're going all the way back to the 19-teens, 1920s. So when they were singing Kalinda Fire, Brigade, Water, the Road, you see that, and it was a repetitive, constant chanting that got you outside of your particular ego and made it a communal experience. And if we're talking about music that comes out of an African or West African in particular composition and tradition, that's what the music was supposed to do. It was always supposed to make you feel part of a larger community. And one of the ways soca did that was to give you a visual, to shoot you out of your third eye, right up and out, right? Which is always interesting. That's why some more investigation needs to be done on soca especially if the claim is that you blended raga and calypso to come up with a new rhythm. Because ragas, traditional,
Indian.
classical, not even traditional, classical Indian, ragas are classical Indian piece. And the way that drone is set up is to bring you into a very deep, meditative, introspective space, which clashes 100% with what soca is supposed to send you out.
Yes.
Ragas are supposed to send you in.
You know, the
So,
thing about what has happened to our carnival in the whole is that because it has become, I think, and of course, I also remember our first class when you spoke about contributing to the discourse and you spoke about research and evidence. So whenever I speak, I have to be very careful what is my opinion and what is right. So from my observation, where the carnival emerged from, right, of the plantations, the struggle, you know, the real rebellion. People don't understand what that word really means. And I think the commercialization of our carnival in particular has eroded that. So the creatives who function in this space now, they're not doing it from any, you know, it's not underpinned by anything that is truly historic and that pays homage to the struggles of our forefathers. What is even more forefathers that you're talking about? Are you speaking about my grandparents? You know what I mean? The idea of even that concept, right? And ancestry. And that's something I think we've lost. And I'm saying that as something I'm newly recognizing in doing some of this material, that even the word ancestors, what is that supposed to mean to Black people in Trinidad, right? Descendants of slaves and free Africans, right? And I think so. When we talk about these things, ragas, if you ask him what's a raga, he might tell you, you know, sukatati, right? Because and so there's an absence of anything deep and meaningful and the true origin and what we supposed to be trying to do. And when we speak of rebellion, right? These are empty words now. And you know, and so in doing this covering this material, you realize, you know, because they were young writers and they just on the surface, they just, and now it's about forwards. Now it's about forwards, or you want to win a Grammy, you want to go international, right? And you talk about like all the different styles that became intertwined with soca. And it's only, and from my experience, people was trying to get that song that would take over the world. And if they feel like to scrape off some reggae to put in soca, or that to scrape off some dancehall to put in soca, or it became EDM. Remember, Johan and these guys, when they were Mad Men production, right? When they were trying to launch this whole what's it called, boy? With the EDM and the soca, it was called Island Pop, right? And I remember the year when they had the big breakthrough with Kess was in the rhythm, Masha was in the rhythm. Show me where you're from, let your waist in the air, away, in the air, away. And that song was mashing on the road. And people thought, oh, that could be Road March. Well, I guess if you're from Westmore, you could thought that was Road March, right? Westmoreans. But people having a ball with it on the road, and and you see that at carnival time sometimes when a song that was there, but somehow on the road it just explode, and you feel that should have been Road March. Like when Marshall had Party Done with the lady, what's her name? But you're familiar with the song?
Yeah. I want to say Angelique, but no. What is her name? Won't remember right now.
Yeah, boy. Anyhow, yeah, boy. Party Done. Anyhow. But Party Done became immensely popular, and you know, people losing their mind, right? And that could have been Road March as far as they were concerned. But I only said that to say, talk about the phenomenon of songs that seem to explode on Carnival Monday and Tuesday. But Madman and the one of them guys, they were trying to make this island pop a whole, now the new soca. And I remember DJs like Shal and them, you know, telling young fellas who they bringing songs Shal, because you know guys always trying to appease the DJs. And Shal telling people, see right now, the thing is island pop. You know, you have to go by your and sending them in by your hand them to get island pop. And that next year, everything flopped. Every single island pop nosedive. Right? It nosedive. And again, always trying to get that song or song that they think is accessible to the world, which is, from my observation and as a producer, is what people keep trying to do with soca, right? It was never good enough as is. They always had to do something that Cal and Carol, right? When they thought the problem was the syncopation in the snare, right? So when you look at songs like Savage, and the rhythm is 2 and 4. Savage, and doom, cap, boom, and that savage, doom, bam, doom. So they took out that syncopation because they felt that rhythm is more accessible now. It's great music. I love Savage, right? It's a it's a bit cool. But that was their thinking, that if we remove, and I've heard many, so many people talk about what to do to get America or white people.
That is the point that always irks me. Every time people talk about soca going international, they really mean getting a white American audience.
Correct.
Because I know, like being in DC and having a man from Nigeria argue with me who is better, Destra or Faya. And I'm like, who the hell you know all this? But they're listening to it in Africa, in South America, all up and down the islands. They're listening to and they can't even say they're talking about a white audience because it's taken hold in Europe, especially where that soca and EDM, that thin line in between there. Before that, and I suppose you can look at jungle, for example, laying the groundwork. So jungle, EDM, and dancehall mixed together as a British thing, and that took off. And out of that came drum and bass, and out of that came dubstep, and blah 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 blah. The interesting thing too, soca usually borrows from African diaspora music. When it tries to borrow from non-African diaspora music, it does not go very far, right? And then when it borrows music that doesn't fit the same function that soca is supposed to fit, it does not go anywhere at all. I mean, I say thank God every day that 80s rap soca thing did not last very long. There were about 2 or 3 songs where they try a rap in it because it was novel, but it didn't last. Marshall tried to bring it back with going with Pitbull. Pitbull second, Dougie Freshface. Right. And interesting. But the point you're making that it's not experimentation for creativity's sake, it's experimentation for commercial sake.
Right.
Is a big it's a big problem, and it kind of goes back to the prominence of capitalism, the dominance, I should say, not just the prominence, but the dominance, and it's affecting music globally. And you could go as back as pop becoming a legitimate genre. So back in the day, I think up until maybe the early 70s, mid 70s, pop wasn't a distinct genre. Pop was what was popular.
But isn't that still the case, Dr. Francis? Because it's a sliding scale. Pop music of the 80s and pop music of 2020 is not the same thing.
No, but now it's a legitimate. So like when you watch these you watch the music shows and you watch behind, they're now trying to write something specifically called pop.
Sure, but if you examine what that is, the title stays the same, but what fills the container switches out.
Yes.
You have pop, but then you throw out Britney Spears pop of the 2000s is not, you know, what's these guys, these youngsters from Korea?
K-pop.
People, it's not, you know, it's not that, no, it's not. So they have pop, sure, the label pop, but the styles change all the time for what pop is.
Yes. I have a very disparaging explanation of what pop music is. So I should
Please
keep.
share.
Oh,
Please share. If you want, you can pause record.
no. Um, in some of the readings and some of the research I've done, pop music is a very sophisticated form of cultural appropriation where something is organically popular
Mm-hmm.
and you divest that of the deeper communal meaning because it sounds nice and you reproduce the sound without the substance.
Right.
Right? So
For as long as you can.
as long as you can, and then you move on to the next new trend. So that's one of the reasons it keeps shifting. So there's an organic movement. So and we could talk about pop, like, so you get these weird hybrids like rock pop.
Mm-hmm.
So the no, I just thought of that article. Some people will argue rock in and of itself is a bit of an appropriation.
Well, if you go find out back, what the black woman who was her camera name?
Um, oh gosh, with Hound Dog.
Yes.
3-4. No, I will not remember her name, but she was boss on the guitar.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
then you could go farther back. Amiri Baraka, for example, in the Blues People, though Amiri Baraka is he's a bit too separatist. He's unforgiving in his interpretation of who can and who should be able to play music. So he goes all the way back to jazz and blues and the progression of rock and roll as it comes out of the blues, which birth, some people argue blues birth jazz or they came out alongside of each other. You only go far back enough, you were playing blues jazz on the plantation, so it's kind of hard to differentiate. Jazz really takes form in the brothels in New Orleans. Sounds very familiar to calypso, which is why I think there was such an interesting marriage between calypso and jazz in the 20s, 30s, 40s.
Right. Because there's evidence that shows that the early forms of calypso, the style of playing came out of the early jazz, that improvisational type of jazz, clarinet and that kind of instrumentation.
And enhanced because you would have okiris and kalinda. So here in Trinidad on the island, you have no orikis, orikis. Never remember. It's always misplaced the R and the K in that word.
How do you spell that word, ma'am?
It is either Oriki. It is the Yoruba praise song, specifically Orisha praise song. So it's religious music. So it's either Oriki, and it's very sad that I always mix it up if I don't read it, or Okiri, but I think it's Oriki. Don't hold me to that. I have it written properly in the modules. Saying it off the top of my head, I don't always get it right because I mix those with the letters up. So you had those which also influenced sound keys and spiritual Baptist music. And then you had kalinda, which would be the war coming out of the martial tradition. So kalinda is both stick fighting and the music that accompanied stick fighting. And so you have these two kind of coming together because Trinidad culture is a series of syncretisms. Right? So you had disparate African communities forced together through slavery who found similarities, which created syncretisms, right? And then those syncretisms resyncretized with European, East Indian, and so on, right? Now, if they want to talk about soca being a blend of African and East Indian, the most natural thing to look at is Tassa. right? Partly because of the history, this is where the first set of blending actually took place. So you would have Africans in Hosea, Beat and Tassa. You still have them in Hosea, Beat and Tassa, because the arrangement of the drums is very similar to African arrangement of the drums. You have bass, you have cutter, you have the filler. So you have those three different types playing three different types of rhythm coming together. And so the Africans like, yeah, that sounds familiar, boy. Yeah, let me join in and jam. And so you have that. So you have in Trinidad a very unique form of Tassa music. When you listen to Tassa from the continent, from the subcontinent, it sounds different. It's a different rhythm. And then you listen to Tassa in Trinidad, and like you could spot it, like, yeah, that's Trinidad Tassa. It's a different rhythm. So you have a fusion of rhythms there. And you hear it in rhythm sections in Carnival. So you hear that fusion. Now I'm not a trained musician, so I can't pinpoint this is the Indian rhythm and that's it. And I think that's part of the point is there was a complete merger that went on, right? And naturally, I think that is a more natural source of. When you talk to people like Robin Imamsha, for example, I was lucky enough, we had him in class. He was one of our students. And he did his thesis on the birth of Southern Caribbean music, right? Soca. And the studio protocols that they used. And the fact that the protocol was how can we record the deepest bass possible, which was the bass pan. And the beating of the bass pan is related to, especially the duduk, is related to the rhythm section. And the rhythm sections, we see the iron bands that come out now, sans pan, but you just have the rhythm section, iron bands, and people beating iron, people beating drum, and those kind of rhythms. And so it's to unpack that syncretism that we might get closer to understanding elements of soca and the elements that ever so often cycle back in, either now through sampling, well, now primarily through sampling. So Full Extreme, for example, Full Extreme swept because it sampled Bassman, which swept, Bassman came out of nowhere as Road March.
No, could I just say, when people use the word sampling, right? No. So when I say sampling in Full Extreme, you mean the style or the actual, because a sample is the actual snippet of something, right?
Yeah, so they took a sample here and they split it in half. And again, talking as a novice, a non-musician, but when you listen to it, the bassman rhythm, they actually start in the middle of the bass line and loop it. So it sounds a little different, but it sounds familiar at the same time.
But they definitely copy the shadow style without a doubt. You're hearing shadow all over that. There's no disputing that. I don't think they would dispute that either.
No. And so it did almost exactly the same thing Bassman did. No one was talking about Bassman before Monday 1974.
Right.
And for all the pans to really learn bass, like they kept it on the wraps, they learned and they came out on the road and they played Bassman and Bassman sweat. So there's a Rolling Stone article on it, right? The expectation was either Kitchener or Sparrow would win Road March that year. Then all of a sudden, every pan man beat Bassman, which pisses me off because I'm yet to hear a recording of pan playing Bassman. I look into it. I think that would be very interesting. And so because I don't know, there's several issues when we talk about our let me say native. Slight difference between native and indigenous. It's not one. I don't want to get into that argument. Let's say our homegrown music and styles is part of the problem is that we still need to equate things with European processes. to make it make
Well,
sense and
no,
make it.
you say European processes, but in the youth of today, they just want to make money.
No, I know that, not that they don't want to make money, but even so we don't talk about, for example, that there's an ingrained spirituality in calypso and soca. It's supposed to be there.
Supposed to be there, right?
That's the reason it functions well. Right? I was telling I don't know why I was talking about that. But that is why, for example, soca used to be like living in foreign and don't put on soca on your headphones because people will watch it like you're crazy. Because there's guaranteed to be a moment where you stop what you're doing, you throw up your hands. And it's not that it instructed you to do so, it's the vibration of the music, the rhythm of the music, and an implied instruction in how you're supposed to dance the music. Um, which is one of the ways you differentiate different forms of African and African derived music. Like the difference between um Zouk, let's say, and um well, Bouillon is a Bouillon and Zouk are related. They come from the same subset of the same family, right? But so there's a difference in how you want to dance. Let me so there's a difference between how you want to dance the Zouk and how you want to dance the compa, right? Um, so and there's a difference between how you want to dance the compa and how you want to dance the kwasa kwasa, right? Kwasa kwasa actually technically is not the official name. That's the dance that goes along with the music, but we go call it kwasa kwasa, right? So kwasa kwasa from Congo, right? Compa is from Haiti. They sound quite similar in terms of how the rhythm plays, right? But one is a slap foot dance. So the compa, you're supposed to stamp the natural dance is to stop a 1 2 1 2, and you're slapping your foot on the ground. So there's a different dance that you do too. So if you're not really, you can't really differentiate the rhythm, the natural inclination is to dance differently. And I find it fascinating. I'm not sure how many people, if there is research on that, but the differentiation in genre for a lot of the popular African music is the dancing you want to do, not necessarily that they sound so disparate, which is fascinating to me. And again, this is based on anecdotal observation. So there's a lot of research to be done on it. But yeah, that list of 23 types of soca probably will grow every year. Some of them were short-lived, like the rap soca was short-lived. Um, Even shorter lived, thank God, was that horrible, horrible period in the early 2000s when they kept pulling horrible, horrible 80s songs to sample.
Well, yeah, to interpolate when you're writing these melodies off of. But you see, when it worked,
Yes, and
right?
when it didn't work, it made me cringe.
Yeah. But that's the thing with all experimentation, right? Which I find that. But you see, I have so often come across people who think, just try to simplify, just do this, just do that, right? I have artists come to me with some songs that, what's supposed to do with that? Come on, man, use Neighbor Bernard. Let's put a rhythm with that, and like, oh, they're killing me here. Or they're killing me. You just can't bring anything, anything can be a song. I remember when Maximus had he did the interpolation of Soca Train,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that is probably the most successful attempt in that approach,
Mm.
right? Because nothing else got to that level, right? All the attempts after that failed, right? Well, maybe not outright failed, but certainly didn't have as much impact. The closest one, and not even close, one that kind of poked his head out was Bungie and which one, boy?
Fiery.
Yes, And that was still that was nowhere close to Soca Train.
That Soca Train, I think is again anecdotally, I think it's actually easier to cover a slower soca from back in the day than to try the frenetic, because Fiery, when you listen to my only maestro could do Fiery, and it's a very 70s song.
Yeah.
It's a very, very 70s song.
Disco.
Very disco. It's just like I disco. And doesn't play well then in the early 2000s when disco is not even a fond memory, it's a buried memory.
Disco was an insult.
Oh yes, well there's some racism involved in that as well, but you know. Well, or I should say, not just racism, but commercialization.
Yeah.
Because it was a genre that was killed.
Correct.
It started. I mean, you can't fault Donna Summer. I don't care.
Not those songs
Right.
stand on their own. I mean, you can't, yeah.
So, like Donna Summer, Thelma Houston, the early when it really was the faster pace blue R&B. It came right out of R&B, faster pace, and then it got diluted because it was a commercial success and they killed it. When we see some of that in soca as well, because soca starts to take off almost from, I think it really dug in its heels from 1980 come forward. We had it in the 70s and it was going well, and you had things like breakouts like Bassman, Endless Vibration, and so on. And the experimentation was a lot deeper, a lot more disparate in the 70s. And it started to solidify in the 80s. So by the time Super Blue sings Soca Baptist in 1980, soca was a very, very distinct style, differentiating from calypso, right? And we still rode, I shouldn't even say that. I mean, the real differentiation probably in the 90s, because in the 80s, you still had so calypso. You can say it was a calypso, you can say it was soca, it was party music. And then by mid-90s, the experimentation took off in a completely different direction. And so it was experimenting with the experimentation of soca and other things. So it started to sound even more different than calypso. Not to say that they again aren't in the same family. So, for example, when Chris on did a show last year, and I know who you need to talk to, but he need to record it and release it, because I think everyone needs to hear it. He did a version of Family. And when you break it down and pull it back to its calypso roots, it's in there. You can't believe, you're just like, oh, this is Family, but it's in there. Actually, he pulled it all the way back to some bluesy jazz roots. It's in there. I was listening to Freetown Collective put out an album this year. You know, they had their song with Can You Feel the Love? Yeah, with Private Ryan, but they remix a song from their other album, and they think Red Eye. They remixed the song, and they played it on a calypso soca beat, and they go, but that was in the song all the time. It's just that the way they produced it on the other album was more pop. And then they put in the soca, but when you listen to it together, you're like, that was in there all the time. So, and that's also another complexity we don't talk about with our music. There are a lot of buried things in the music you can pull out, you know. Again, anecdotally, I remember playing with a band, a Trinidadian band, a song I wrote, and we played it 5 different ways. Because it was all in the song. So it didn't sound like we were trying to strain to make it sound like a soca song. It was in there. We didn't strain to make it sound like a rock song. It was in there. It was all tied in because, as a creative, you filter your experiences, you filter your inspirations, you filter a whole lot of things into what you create. So when we talk about pulling out meaning that the author didn't intend, it wasn't a conscious decision to put it in there. It wasn't like, you know what? I listened to the Beatles when I was growing up, so I'm going to write a song. The song, it's not that at all. It just so happens that it's somewhere in the back of your mind and something sparks something and it comes out, right? And this is even before we go into the metaphysical explanation of what creativity is, right? Because then you're channeling a whole lot of stuff you didn't know was there. So the idea is to expand how we talk about it. Going back to this idea that soca is not international because it doesn't have an American audience, even though it does have an American audience. And the reason it will have an American audience because it doesn't sound like something America will produce. But we don't take that on.
Which is what we should be playing to, because I think if artists aren't interested in being genuine, right? An artist is not just somebody who tries to write a song. I think you have to be grounded in something that is almost immovable, right? And you live or die by it, right? Recently, I was looking at a little thing with Alanis Morissette, and he played a song that she recorded. I don't know what year that was, but she was singing some disco boy something, and some kind of, it was, oh my God, and to hear her voice on that type of music. And then she spoke about when the label dropped her, because she was trying to write her own stuff, and she wanted to be autobiographical, and she made a point that the interviewer kind of glazed over, but she said that some label executives were totally like thrown off by the fact that all her lyrics didn't rhyme. Right? And but she was willing to live or die by what was emerging in her as her art, and Super Blue is that. Iowa George is that.
Yeah.
Right? The Mighty Shadow. Right? The David Rudder, Kitchener, right? These are artists who, you can always pick and listen. They were true to their core, whatever their creative essence was, and I'm not using these terms, right? But and I think not every artist can be that. There's some people who, Bungie Garlin, I would put him in that category, right? Marshall Montano, I would not put in that category because he's creative in a different way. What he works for him well, he casts a very wide net and pulling in it. And he don't care which songwriter, which producer, whoever he take from, and he can use it, right? And so he's not sitting down and creating, right? He is harnessing, right, all these creatives, right? And and just able to pick out the okay, this, that one, and he will listen, and okay, we're going with these, right? Which is not to say it's not a...
No, it's a creative process too.
Yes, right? But it's not the same as Colonel Roberts as a writer, right? Or or Bungie Garlin, who is he comes from someplace all the time, and he lives or dies by his bunginess, right? And so I wouldn't, not to disparage Marshall, but he's not the kind of creative like a Shadow, like a Kitchener, like a Iowa George, like a Super Blue, right? Marshall will take a song from Super Blue, take a song from Iowa, will take a song from Shadow and sing it, right? But he can't sit down and compose a song like them. He might argue differently, but I've seen no evidence of that.
That's a different kind of creative talent. I remember having a conversation with a jazz musician who insisted if you don't write your own and sing your own music, you can't be a genius. I was like, I can't agree with that because you have people like Michael Jackson.
Correct. Yes, correct. Yes.
People wrote, he wrote for himself. You can't tell which is which.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the talent Marshall has is it's all egocentric. He's able to infuse himself into whatever. So it sounds authentically his. So we respond to that because it sounds authentically his, whether he wrote it or not.
Marshall, to me, is akin to Clive Davis. It's that Clive Davis didn't sing. But Clive Davis knew how to harness. I mean, at whatever age Clive Davis was at the time, he was in his 70s or maybe older, when he discovered Alicia Keys, when he put together the phenomenal Santana album, right? And Marshall is kind of like that, except that Marshall sings, right? So Clive Davis wasn't a writer, but man, he could spot wherever and bring together and voila, this we're going with. I think Marshall does that. Similar to, it's more like a record executive kind of genius as opposed to a songwriting genius. Or like Michael Jackson would be like a performance genius. And he actually, I think Michael will be, I'll put Michael Jackson and Marshall in the same category. Same category.
Yeah. The creativities in the translation.
Yeah.
And I think that is the challenge. And I don't think you've gotten as far as looking at competition. You said you reached module 4. Module 4 is politics, gender, and I think competition, right?
Well, not competition. Just do the genres and these sub genres. Right? I was just writing up my paragraph for you at the end.
Oh, that's module 3 because I'm not sure where to put Smut. Smut stands alone. Smut is its own module, but it's not officially a module. Because technically it is both a rhetorical device or a device for constructing. It does specific things as well as it is a genre in its own right.
Because see, I was wondering, I had a question mark by that. Right? I said, why Smut isn't its own genre? Because a lot of the calypso, the styles, the genres cross fertilize, right? They all have some elements, right? Especially nation building and even well, I think the strongest one is political commentary. Because that can be devoid of humor, it can be just pure venom. And then you could put some humor in there, but then humor always seems to deal with sex or some, that's a favorite.
Well, not always sex, but sex.
Not always. Yes.
Right. So we tend to list smut as a subgenre of humor because smut tends to be humorous. There's no, and I prefer to call it risque humor myself because I find the word smut smacks of colonial, to say it in a Rasta way, downpression.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's risque humor, but when you read when you Roland has a very interesting take on it because we are talking about two very different cultures clashing here. And if you go all the way back to his history when women were singing the smut songs, sex wasn't taboo. the way it was for the colonial masters. So we had a different take. It wasn't risk. Oh no, oh. It wasn't offensive. It was humorous. So it was more risque humor. And then we learned to hide it because, it was considered obscene to sing outright about these things. So when you read in Hill, for example, a lot of the news reports he pulls from talks about the songs being obscene because they were both-faced smut. They were singing about ting, right? And so as we got quote unquote sophisticated, or in truth more Europeanized, we started hiding those things in smut.
And I would say it's really about the Roman Catholic Church, because Roman Catholic Church always seemed to be in the background somewhere, trying to, control, influence, suppress, oppress,
Well, I'll throw the Anglicans in there too.
Sorry?
I'll throw the Anglicans in there.
Okay.
The English, technically Anglicanism is just English Catholicism.
Exactly. That's what, yeah.
But
Anglicans could get divorced.
well, yeah, he was tired of chopping off heads, so he made up his own religion where he could get divorced. But so.
Which is amazing. If people think about that, right? They realize how ridiculous, religion. You know what? I want to get divorced. I make my own religion, right? That says all about God. What God say.
He was the king of England. He could do what he wants.
Well, yeah, okay. But the king of England have more rank than God.
Well, the chain of being, the king was appointed by God. And so therefore the king could speak for God.
Okay. See, these are the things, to me, when people, if you pause for a second and think about it, they realize, clearly you're yanking my chain.
Yeah, well, that is the difference between religion and spirituality. Right. That is one of the reasons early churches actually did not want their members reading the Bible, because it raised a lot of questions. A whole lot of questions. And when you read Kings, for example, the whole downfall of Israel because the kings were sinners. So it's the king fault.
Right.
Right. So why want a king? So don't let them read the Bible, because they will ask these questions and we will get in trouble. Right. But that force, that Eurocentric moral force, good for good and bad, the reaction to good and bad, it does create, or it does force the artist to be creative, to say things, right, that they would have been able to say openly if it was a different culture. And so I call it risque humor. The idea behind humor, one of the main theories, is that humor pushes you to that uncomfortable place. And right before it pushes you over the edge, you laugh because it's a nervous reaction. So that's really what triggers our laughing in a humorous situation. So when you look at most humor takes a societal taboo and plays with it, because the idea is that you will be uncomfortable because we know it's wrong, and so you push us right up to the edge of it. And of course that means humor changes over time. So one of the questions we have, is it still smart if we are more open about sexuality now?
Yes, because smart is smart because the topic and the content, you're being comfortable with it to make it not smart.
Was it ever really, truly, by the Oxford definition of smart, was it really smart?
Well, how to put it this way, when you say smart, everybody know what a smart is. So I don't even have to think about the Oxford Dictionary, the definition. When you play a calypso, right? To me, anybody who grew up listening to calypso could tell you, hey, this is smart, or not as smart, So yeah, I think we have, 'cause you mentioned just now the what you say risque. That's a very sophisticated way. Nobody will understand. If you say risque humor, what? Risky humor?
Yeah,
But when it says smut,
is
right?
because the definition, yes, it's you with the word. The definition of smut is pornography,
Right. Mhm.
right?
Well,
What we have is far more sophisticated when we talk about smut calypsos, especially smut calypsos of the past. Far more sophisticated. You
and done
can
rope
sing
now, yeah.
and people don't know what you're singing about unless they know what you're singing about, right? That double entendre as a rhetorical device becomes very important.
Well,
And
that is, yeah.
looking back, looking back to reclaim the dignity of what we did and the sophistication of what we did, should we really be calling it smart? Should we be lumping it in with um, in the larger category of Playboy magazine or Hustler magazine?
Well, no, I mean, like I say, I think if you tell people, if you say pornography to people, they thinking, raw, open, sexual activity, right? Smut brings it at a certain coyness, right? It's hidden, so the definition of the word smut differs from the cultural understanding or use of the word in the context of calypso, I think.
It does. It does significantly. And so the word smut then carries with it another element of history. So I'm on the fence whether you change it or not, because most people know it as smut. But also to recognize by calling it smut, we're also acknowledging that um, it was negatively judged and labeled by a colonial society that held up a certain morality.
Right, but that was through the whole carnival and the whole, right? The way
Yes.
we danced and everything was judged through that lens. And I think, you know, that argument only comes up if you are like yourself in terms of you have a certain knowledge base. I think generally speaking, you know, you say smart, you'll have a hard time really finding what smart is because we grew up hearing Spyro singing smart. What's the name of this song, boy? I keep saying Sissy, not Sissy.
Mimi.
Sa, yeah.
Here's so
But,
much to pick from.
huh?
Mimi.
Sasa, yeah, right? So we know what smart is, and smart is cute, right? Because smart allows you can listen to a smart in front of your parents, right? Because it's hidden in, we know the meaning, but the language and the face of it, parents felt comfortable enough, to dance to the chest, child dances, right? Because we're not thinking about the literal, what Sparrow's talking about, eating what Sparrow were eating there, right? So yeah, so I think if you, I don't know, it's a hard sell to try to, because we as a culture we know what smart is.
There's
And
an
you say,
argument on both sides. Keeping it the title smut um acknowledges all that we're talking about, acknowledges the fact that it was judged a certain way because who was ruling at the time, and it was called that. So we can keep it there as a historical marker, right? All the while explaining if a foreigner landed,
yeah, you're going.
if a foreigner landed and say, yeah, you want to hear something? So like,
Are you there?
I had
Check 1, 2.
wait, were you frozen just now?
You were frozen. Was
Oh,
I frozen too?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, yesterday I had a horrible experience of my internet just cutting out of me in the middle of class, and it hurt. It hurt so much. Yes, but these are, it's not a solvable issue, I don't think. I think it's something that comes up for conversation.
Well,
For us to recognize the sophistication in smut, because it's
I
very
agree with that
sophisticated. It's
100%. Yeah,
very
I agree
hard to do.
100%. But Dr. Francis, often during this program, I realize I come up against the clash between the layman and the learned professor, right? Because people walk around, and they take things for granted, right? They don't, like, and I guess that's the whole problem with the carnival and stuff. People in the carnival playing mass, Juve, where that come from? Jambalasi is not the same thing, right? And yeah, so and to me, this argument is smart, and the meaning of smart is like, you have to not educate the general population to understand what the problem might be, because smart is smart, that's smart, right? Which is something I find coming up a lot in topics where, how the average man, is in the carnival. It differs from, historical origins and facts and so forth. That's a side observation.
It is, and it'll be I don't want to say it's a necessary, it's a natural consequence. I'll say it's a natural consequence. But it is our job, if we are actually studying carnival and the elements of carnival, it is our job to understand what the popular vision or what the popular understanding is, and the deeper analysis. And once upon a time, it was a lot easier for academia to then, give a public lecture or public talk and share these findings in a way that the layperson could understand. What we find now is the layperson don't care to understand. So it's not like I played Juve and I had this experience and I really want to know what this experience is. They don't even care to know what the experience is. Right? And I find that that's the scary thing that we face. And part of the problem though is that we no longer take our information to the people. We very rarely write about it, except if it's carnival time and some major controversy happen. And then you'll have people like Bridget Breton writing something, or you'd have Prof writing something, right? So it's either Carnival or Calypso History Month. You might see that kind of interest, but people don't go and talk about it. I remember if it was either last year or year before. Brother Resistance called, who was doing this was before TTT, so probably it was 2018. And I think it was either TV6 or CNTV. I can't remember which one was covering the masquerade. He called them and recommended that I go on the show to be a commenter. Haven't heard from them yet. In 2016, I tried it was CTV who was covering it. So I tried to get in CTV to see somebody to offer my services for free, to comment on Carnival, because the misinformation, if there was any information offered, it was misinformation. There was no depth. There was nothing. So you're watching it, you're not learning a thing.
Correct.
Right. And I remember I was incensed because that year the commentator asked, there was a king sailor, and it was the year of Zika. It was a king sailor, and so his backpack was this gorgeous green mosquito. And the commentator actually goes, "What's that? Why you had that there? What's going on?" And if I could have reached any TV and smacker, I would have reached any TV and smackers. Like, you obviously have no idea what a king sailor is, where the backpack tradition come from, or the fact that mass has been used since at least the turn of the century as a form of commentary on what's going on. So you have no idea what is really going on in the screen. And anybody watching you at home or in foreign will have no idea what's going on the screen because they could get no information, right? And so if you compare it to, if you watch even a sporting event, the amount of information you get from the commentators in a sporting event By the time you're done, you know the sport.
Yeah.
You're entertained, but you also know the sport. So we're missing grand opportunities, part
Yeah.
because the media don't care.
Right.
Okay, but please, no one watch this on Sume if you find it. Go Sume. But
And because TV is only for entertainment, right? And you have to be cute to be on TV, and you have to sound bubbly and whatever, right? It's not knowledge. I mean, I pointed to the young lady who called phase 2, phase 11.
they should have a little bit of shame. I mean, you don't necessarily have to go into the depths that we would go in a master's program.
Yeah.
But, have some kind of,
Dr. Francis, to not even know how to say phase 2, you have to be so removed from Carnival not to know that those 2 upright slashes is not 11, it beats 2, the second. Phase 2.
even if you're not in carnival, this is simple education, right? Phase 2, right? It's numerals. It's Roman numerals. It's obviously I. So
I guess it wasn't obvious to her, right? Because she said phase 11. And it was funny at first, but it's tragic. But this is how people treat media, right? It's only about entertainment now. So you want somebody cute, or you want to have a stylish, you're being dressed by whoever, and what come out your mouth, who cares? Just, just even, I mean, Jason is my partner, right? But Jason used to be bluffing, right? He's a good bluffer, right? He hosted something, Jason doesn't know research or nothing. He just, bluff. And I think that's a problem with media and the whole. Even this girl, and she was a morning talk show host. And it's a combination of bluffing and just having a peripheral knowledge of what she was talking about. What she name is again in the morning? She gone now. She name is again by the Indian lady.
Asian lady.
The Indian lady. Oh gosh, what of her name? She gone now. She was there. Hema? Hema? Hema, I think it's Hema. Hema something, right? But they are, the grandstanding, they're not really, and that is what user areas for. Radio as well too. On radio, even MCs, I remember I sat in for We Beat in St. James as a judge for something I had there. And the MCs kept mispronouncing Beryl McBurney's name. And Noble Douglas was seated next to me as a judge. And after how many ever fumbles, Noble from the judges just corrected them, Beryl McBurney. And their response was, well, we ain't the godparents. Right? Which in sense, Noble, and everybody else on this panel for that matter, because you have no, how you cannot be so dismissive when you mispronouncing, Beryl McBurney's name. That means you have no idea who this woman is, her significance to our country, to dance, to our culture, and the whole. You talk about, but this is what passes for MC of a show. They don't have to have any knowledge on anything. They just could talk and smile and be cute and stall for time, right? And anyway, I don't get on my soapbox about these type of.
Well, part of the problem is that how will you know if you don't know?
Well,
Or to quote to paraphrase from the Dragon Can Dance, we could only see what we know how to see.
Right. You have to be educated to know your ignorance.
So at what point in primary or secondary school do we get to educate people on our own culture in a deeper way? When you get reports of the sociology book for primary school wrong, have seriously wrong information in it. When our students don't even know why the holidays we have are the holidays we have. Oh. They can't even see. And again, partly feeling if we step outside, the education system, we are supposed to, once upon a time you wrote op-eds, you sent in your letters and da 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 da. Now the only thing the op-eds are concerned with, any letters, is either politics or crime or money. We don't really have open discussions on culture and what our culture is supposed to be. Even with best village, the reason for having better village and then best village no longer applies. It's not embedded. It's supposed to do that, but people don't treat it that way. It's not showcased that way. It doesn't promote what it's supposed to promote. A deep sense of cultural pride. It doesn't do that.
No, because that's the next thing. Whew, that's the next thing. Just today, when I was reading through the notes, the modules, and you mentioned Eric Williams, right? When he was commenting the Calypsonian being political scientist.
Mm.
And every time the name Eric Williams comes up, I feel like if we always need to form a secret society of Eric Williams, right? Because I almost feel like if people have succeeded in making the name Eric Williams like a dirty, like insult. Oh, it's almost like it's kind of Trumpian, right? In that we are supposed to believe that he was just the worst person, that he just wanted, he wanted to destroy it, right? He had nothing to build this country. And this is how people view Eric Williams, and I guess that was always been some people's agenda, and I guess to some extent they've succeeded. But at some point in time, if Trinidad is ever going to grapple with its true history, then how do you omit Eric Williams? And especially when he, in his own words and his own writings, and he have his speeches and whatnot, says exactly what he's trying to accomplish, make steps to try to accomplish that. Now, you might agree or disagree, but then there's, like I say, a kind of cherry picking and re-characterizing of what his intent was. And like, I found it to be kind of amazing, because it's like a wholesale ignoring, you were ignoring this body of work, these things he's written, what he's been trying to do, then all the historical accounts, and then they're trying to just reframe everything, which in some ways they've succeeded in doing, based on the fact that for your 50th anniversary of Antigua, you barely how do you celebrate the 50th anniversary of independence and not equivalence all over that? How can you, you know what I mean? That was...
It depends who was in power at the time too.
Well, yes, but that's exactly my point. That's exactly it. And you don't want to... it's not productive to frame things like that, because then the conversation halts. But that's the fact. That's the actual naked truth of the whole thing, right? But if you say it, you're racist.
That was a charge that has always been leveled against Williams. Coming from that speech he made in Woodford Square when he was so bitterly disappointed with the DLP and was speaking specifically about DLP leadership.
Yes.
And when you read the whole thing, that recalcitrant minority has been misquoted far too often. And when you read it in context, it's not what they say he said, right? The recalcitrant minority was specifically the DLP and their anti-independence movement. They did not want independence. They were staunchly against it. They didn't want federation. They didn't want independence. And they were using race as the organizational impetus for that movement. So the recalcitrant minority, what he was saying is like, don't listen to them. They do not represent India. They are selling you a makeup story. if you look at the real India and Nehru and what Nehru is doing and uniting his country, they are not doing that. Don't listen to them, right? But even within the PNM, that quotation got misrepresented. All they heard was race. They didn't hear the specificity of it. And so from there you get this build up, or it's allowed by that misinterpretation, it allowed for a deepening divide.
Yeah.
So Rolla's my boy. I just finished reading his book. That's why. So he had an article on an essay on Eric Williams' early career, right? And the lead up to that speech, and talks about that speech a little bit and how it was immediately misinterpreted, even by one of the founding members of the PNM, who then withdrew, Mahabir, I can't remember his first name, who then withdrew, right? Because he felt attacked. Now, we have to remember that this bifurcation is directly related to divide and conquer and colonial policies. It's been exploited ever since. It gets worse every year. And on the one hand, you have people who shy away from talking about it at all because they don't want to seem racist. And so the misinformation is allowed to spread because we don't tackle the misinformation. Right. Now, there were some issues culturally with Williams and Williams' thinking. Had nothing really to do with race specifically. Williams, as a nationalist, firmly believed that there needed to be a homogenous or homogenized national culture.
As he stated in his book, the book he wrote before independence.
Yeah.
That's right.
So nationalism, that ideology, assumed a singular nation state with a singular identity. So that was problematic in and of itself. What makes it even worse is that his assumption was that we were too far removed from Africa and India, so we technically had a European culture, and that's what we needed to build our national identity on, which is why 1970 exploded like it did, because you're denying a fundamental identity building block, which is your ethnicity. So that was problem one. Problem two, he was hell-bent as he was more left and floated into the center, but as a leftist, he was hell-bent on reforming education, right? Unfortunately, he undermined his own radical approaches by assuming that the people just weren't educated enough to benefit from reformed education, if you understand what, not stupid, but he thought they were too ignorant to really understand what he was trying to do, and he started making concessions and ultimately did not trust in the very process that he wanted to establish that it would work. So it's a radical form of education, like public education, where you bring the topics to the people and let the people talk on Ramaji, and they will come to this understanding through talking to them. But he didn't trust that system could actually work. So ultimately, while we made some progress with the comprehensive schools and setting up schools in every district and opening up education that way, because remember, before that, education was extremely closed. And only the top 3 people got a scholarship to go to secondary school. If you couldn't afford to pay, you couldn't go.
Right.
So he changes that. He opens up the model, and that's very good, but he leaves some of the fundamental hierarchies in place. So you get prestige schools and you get government schools. And we've been
that comes into the Concordat.
Yeah, I think so, because he made concessions with the denominational schools.
Yeah.
Right, because they didn't want the marish and the parish attended. And so he conceded to that. Let them run it kind of their own way and run government schools. So that divide just started widening because he didn't convince the population. He also didn't change the culture of the population to recognize that wherever you get it from, education is education and use it. So you still had very biased hiring practices. So to this day, people still ask you what secondary school you went to. Right? I'm like, I have a PhD at this point. Where I went to secondary school is of no consequence. Why do I need to apply with where I went secondary school? I have AP. You understand what I mean? I have the highest degree you can get. Where I went secondary school is not relevant. But I still want you to put it on your application. So it's ingrained in our society that there's this hierarchy. If you went to a prestige school and you make it for the 7 years, top. Make it for the 5 years, second. Then government school, 7 years, good. 5 years, and then honestly, funny enough, private schools. That's when you couldn't cut it to get into either. So you had to pay your way. So he did not address that he did not attempt to make that cultural shift because ultimately he didn't believe it would work. And so that's part of the deeper levels of some of the problems we have. But the idea of using culture to build national identity was remarkable. And to shape it in a purely Trinidadian way and come up with something is remarkable. And we don't talk about it as much. We don't celebrate it much. We don't even talk about it with some of the underlying issues that it has, anything like that. And all this, again, to bring it back to the class, factors in to class. Even when you talk about Williams and Calypso, there's what I like to call the Bray era. So when Williams famously said, "Let the jackass bray." So I call it the Bray era. You can sing what you want. You can attack who you want. You can sing anything. And then there's a politicization that starts with the first UNC administration trying to legislate against Calypsonians singing about sitting politicians. They tried to bring it as a law again in the 2000s, and it fails both times because, well, Calypso, you're supposed to sing about who you want and when you want. That's part of its function. And then instead, what you got was the influence of prizes, the Dimash Gras, and funneling in. So it's a bit of self-censorship and a bit of trying to win, chasing the crown. So you're singing certain things. It's still politically charged though, because when it's not on the rare occasions when it's not a PNM year, when PNM not in power and we coming close to elections, the vitriol is a lot higher than when PNM is in power. And that might be based on historical relationship as much as anything else. So yeah, we hit an hour and a half. And my online policy is try no more than an hour, as close to an hour and a half screen time as possible, because it's a different dynamic than being face to face. But I don't want to curtail the conversation or anything related.
No, it's fine. I mean, yeah. There was anything I wanted to ask about? I covered the things that yeah, we did with the romantic love, erotica, pan song, smart. That's it, yes.
Just to go back to the pan song though, I can't remember which interview it was, but Kitchener actually talked about him coming up with 3 distinct formulas.
Mm.
So
Really.
he had the social / political commentaries formula. He had the pan formula, and he had a regular road march formula. Um, but as you pointed out, he allowed for the arranger to do his thing.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the issues that we don't really discuss with the pan song is that there's a communal relationship between the pan arranger and the calypsonian. So it used to be you heard a song you like, and you went and you arranged it for pan.
Right.
With the advent of the pan song, then you're cutting out that communal relationship.
Right. But so I was heavily involved in recording when the pan song became a thing. But the melodic structure of what became the most popular songs didn't translate well in pan, right? Use of syncopation. Pan lives and dies by syncopation, right? So when you have these writers don't understand the difference between a pop melody or what, or you know, ballad type melody, and what works well on pan. So the pan couldn't play. So let's say, like what boy, okay. So Fian won a match with Get On, right? We have the best to tear it up. We don't have a bit on the jam to tear it up. To make it a ball on it. Right now, I'm quite sure if Bogisha really wanted to, he could take that and do something with it. But it does not, on first listening, you know, make you think, oh man, I can hear this, I hear that, I hear that, right? But it won the road match, right? And people are about with it on the road. But how invaders, what invaders going to do with that, right? And I think I remember because this guy, what's his name? Used to play Song Evolution, the Rastaman, Saxman, Oba, right? When he did In My House, I was working with Pelham in them days, right? And there was a whole chunk of music that came out, really great music. If you're talking about melodic development and chords, right? Where it was just enough for pan men, because In My House was a very popular, I think some band one pan with that song, right? But then the Fosso took it to the next level though, right? Right? And I think the Fosso was trying to be the next Kitchener. I think in his mind somehow, he was the man to take out that mantle of doing songs for pan, and the Fosso went crazy. I remember musicians and background vocalists especially complaining about the Fosso. Because when you get called by listening to the Fosso song, just the whole day spending, because there's so many lines, so many things, it's so intricate. And you know, you can argue they were great compositions, but they were very complex, and most pan arrangers didn't want to touch it after a while because, like, you know, it goes too far. And if also, I remember hearing him complaining about the band's not playing his songs, and he's writing specifically for the pan. Right?
I think he left no space. You have to leave space.
Yeah,
It's like I equate the pan arranger with like a jazz musician. So you see how I can take, like Ella Fitzgerald, for example, sings a tisket a tasket. I bought a yellow basket. She takes a nursery rhyme and turns it into a jazz standard, right? So it's being able to give them space to pull out things. And Kitchener was a genius at that. Because he will give you a basic melody, but how you want to add runs, break it up, do whatever, that was all on the pan man. So
also, in doing, and I could draw now from ethnomusicology class, right? Where we have so many people creating without doing it just over instinct, right? Without any formal training, right? So in some ways it begins with a form of mimicry, right? And then it, it blossoms into something. And I think the it, pop North American or Western culture, music especially, it got so ingrained. I remember for me, as a young musician coming up, I wasn't learning to play calypso. I was learning to play what was on the radio, right? Not until I started to play in bands, when I played my first band in QRC, Magnum Songs, when I started to learn to play calypso, right? When I wrote my first calypso to me, it was, wow, I never saw myself writing a calypso because I was so into what was on the radio, right? But the fact that now I can arrange a calypso is because it's seeped into my psyche coming up as a child. It was always there. You always listen to it. It's there. It's everywhere, right? But as a band, you're playing and you want to play, the pop songs, and you want to play what's popular. And I think that is something that like I said, the writers, when they started to change their melodies and the pan started to move away, because they were creating a type of music that pan just Bungie. How you going to play even Bungie's early years when he had this song that was that Braxton did, very popular at the time, but then Braxton sampled a piece of Timbaland, Aaliyah thing, dunk dunk, bam 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 bam, and then Bungie started jump up and ride, send them rhythm crazy, send them mad, 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 send them rhythm, right? I mean, maybe the bank maybe you could, but it didn't touch your range. I remember Bugsy, when Bugsy chooses, if you don't feel it, and you can disagree all you want, and when he took this song 2 years ago, this guy, Swappy song, that Face to played, good, thought boy. Oh gosh, Swappy song, party song, he won Groovy with or something with that song, feeling right now, oh good, come on man, miss that out now.
No, trying to, you know.
You make my have to pull out YouTube here, man.
Point out, see if I could find it. Swappy 2018, you say?
Yeah, Swappy. Yeah, at 2019 was it by? I thought 2019 or 2018. Feeling no, that was so it had to be 18 then.
Party Start? No,
Party Start. That is it. Yes.
That's 2019. All right.
Right?
Yeah.
See, nobody in phase 2, the band member wanted to play that song. Right? They had some other thing that they was popular at the time, and Pussy was like, yeah, that's it. Right? And everybody was, kind of coming to the yard and like begrudgingly learning to play this, right? Like, where Pussy going with this? Right? But he turned it into another great arrangement. So and the I don't think Swappy, I didn't talk to him, but I don't think he wrote that with the idea that a band would arrange a song. Similarly with this guy Voice, when he did another Voice, the guy when Despa's one with the song Akil. When Xander, what's the name of that song, boy? Xander took that song and did the Despa's arrangement, right? I don't think Akil had any clue that Clive Xander, not Clive Xander, Carter Xander would take us on a read for Despers. And that's the thing about, I would wager that most Calypsonians back in the day, when a panside played a song, it you know, it easily translated. Nobody was writing specifically, right? Even Kitchener, I never talked to Kitchener, but I would argue that Steelban liked his songs, but I would think maybe later on in his career, by Pan Any Minor and Bees Melody and the Toko Band, that might have been songs that he might have said he was angling, but all his career, bands didn't have an issue taking any Kitchener song and playing on Pan.
He said, and I'm saying this now and I'm trying to remember hard where I get the source from, so I can't remember the source. But one of the things Kitchener said is that he started writing from Pan almost from the inception.
Right.
Because he grew up or he lived near a pan yard and he was fascinated with it. And he started writing songs because nobody was writing songs for Pan. So he started writing songs Pan could play. But the genius was that in writing the songs Pan could play, he was also writing songs humans could sing and want to dance to. And so there's a very fine line. And I think with some of the Foster songs, that frustration the band would have had, the Calypso band would have had, is because these intricacies would be better suited for the pan to play, not for the tent. You want to leave that space, and not leaving that space, then the arranger has nothing to do. I just want to take your song and plop it straight on the pan. So what's the point? It's really your song, not mine, kind of thing. And so what is interesting as well when we talk about songs that they created now they don't want to touch. And I heard like on Pan on the Avenue, they played a Black Eyed Peas song. I think it was Black Eyed Peas. I think it was Boom Boom Pow. I think it was Black Eyed Peas. But in terms of music, like melodic range and all that, is as limited as some of the soca songs you have now. So what you're really complaining about? You understand? There's a weird thing going on there that you wouldn't know.
And a good arranger, because the idea of, you take a song up, any song you do for Pan, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. A Pan song is 8 minutes or used to be 10 minutes, right? So the idea has always been for arrangers to find inspiration and then they have to arrange.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Anyway. But I'm talking to you, Dr. Francis. I think I have to change my thesis. I think I'm searching for a thesis. Because I realize what I'm trying to write on, I'm not playing to my strengths. It's something I'm interested in, but when I talk to you, I can talk about things that I have lived and I understand and I know well. As I remember Martin, when he told me to apply to the program, he said, Neil, you have a story to tell. You know, and because I didn't, I wasn't thinking about ever doing a master's program, but now I feel like I do have a proper thesis topic. It's something that interests me, but it doesn't play to my life experiences and my career experiences.
What's your thesis topic?
It was masculinity in Trinidad Carnival, Tiffin and wine in Carnival post Me Too. That's the title for now. But it is with masculinity, gender, sexuality, that is basically right. And so for me, this Carnival, I was really struck by the freedom and the way women play the mass. And by freedom, I mean like 10 years ago, I had nothing to complain about as far as being vulgar. Like this year, I see some scenes that like these ladies on steroids, right? And it's a time where, to me, men are being most titillated by the female form. And now, to me, I felt like the restraint on even like watching them, right? It's like, and even before Carnival, just looking at the whole Me Too, I remember being in California with Kimber. We were in a songwriting, doing some sessions in LA. when the dominoes was falling with me too. And every week or almost every day, some big papi either resigning, getting fired, apologizing, or all of the above, right? Because of something happened. And then I remember telling Kimber, I think I said, okay, Kimber, we could pass in a rush because none of you assaulted anybody, but sometimes even in the way when we think of a woman as one of the boys, we talking about, being crude. But that wasn't really cool, So I started thinking back in my head now about, wow, I wonder why I mean, because this, you're doing this norm, if you make a rude joke or everything, then it's sexual harassment, you ain't trying to, right? So all that things in my mind, and I'm thinking about now in Carnival, and you're watching, when the least amount of clothes, is the least amount of material and costume now having, right? And a lot of women now, hey, they want no tights and put on the tongues and the gun on the road, right? And the costume stripping off as they go, whatever accoutrements they had to complement as the day roll on, is less and less. And it's more alcohol drinking, and it's more the leg lifting up, and it's more the winding down, and it's more the carrying on, and it's like, and as the men know, right? So I was kind of struck by that dynamic, and how do we now function, right, as men in this Me Too space where it is not cool. I remember Masha Montano had to apologize or change a statement when they were talking about whining, and he made something about whining about something comedy made. I have to look for the newspaper. But then 2 days after, so he had to modify, if not wholly retract the statement, because what he was saying was giving license to, this whole grabbing a woman and whining on a woman because it's Carnival, where clearly that is not the way. Well,
I think there are two things, and it is very cultural and very instinctive. There's nothing wrong with quote unquote thief and a wine.
Right.
If, however, you try to thief a wine and the woman say no and push you away, stop.
Correct.
That is it.
Yes.
That has always been it.
Yes.
What I've seen, what I've noticed though, and you see videos popping up, right? So they have, let's call them independent whiners. Mm-hmm. There are people who won't mind taking a jab. So mm-hmm. The woman was standing by the truck. She was getting on with herself. She was enjoying herself, right? And the first man passed by and tried to whine, and she said no. The second man passed by. He see the interaction. He think to himself, nah, she just whining by herself. She won't be by. So he tried, and she said no. Right? And then they will turn around and say, well, what your bumsy make for if not to whine on? That's not what it make for. If I want to whine, I go whine. If I don't want you whining on it, I have that right. I don't want you whining on it. If I don't mind you whining on it, we could whine. That's fine. But just because I whining don't mean you have the right to. I mean, you could attempt, and if you say no, move on. Just because I whine don't mean you have the right and the privilege to whine on me whether I want you to whine on me or not. That was always the case. That's how people operated in Carnival. And as a matter of fact, there was a point, there was like to call them eras, there was a wine era. You bounce up a strange room, see a wine, the song done, you move on. Yeah. And then that started to change, where for some reason, if you take one wine early in the day, that means you're free to take wines whenever you feel like. That was never the operation.
Well, the thing is, it differs from person to person and even your age, right?
Yeah.
Or even your physical build. I find that bigger girls are less, I am generally not a whiner boy for Carnival, but if I feel I want to whine somebody, I would never. You see a lot of girls who walking about with a hot body, I didn't watch them, right? I find that there's some women who you can just still have a freer spirit. And you know, you take a little one and a wine, I'm talking about 15 seconds if so much for me, right? So the thing is, the unwritten rules I'm wondering, and this is the whole the, has it influenced the way the masquerade or the men and women navigate that space for kind of what you did? I felt that restrained in me personally, right? Because and I was feeling that restraint even before we went on kind of a Monday and Tuesday, even just in thinking about, you know, because the men step on the line so easily because of what they think is the norm.
Is you might want a deeper conversation to have on that, and it manifests then in whining culture. But the deeper conversation is the accepted and expected roles of the genders in society at large.
Right. Well, right.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So we are emerging from and it never was 100% this in Trinidad anyway. Because when you talk about, it gets complicated when you talk about the our social makeup and who was always working and who was always out of the house and fairly independent, right? So both men and women were fairly independent outside earning their own money. That's why in the 1930s you actually get all those saga boy calypsos, because the women were earning money by both legal and illegal means, and the men had to depend on them. So in a society where the man is supposed to be the head of the household, they had to create an entire persona around themselves that allowed them to have power, even though they were not economically the head of their households. So you have that dynamic. So there's a level of independence and sexual freedom that was always there. At the same time, influenced by TV, movies, books, so on and so on, all the things coming out from foreign coming in here that we read, and we start to develop this idea that a woman is pretty much, oh, and also coming out of the Bible, right? A woman is a woman's main function. A woman's main function is to be impregnated, is to be to give succor, succor, to the dominant male. Mm-hmm. And immediately from Jamet Carnival come forward, there was that's not what I here for. Mm. There was a different dynamic. What I find interesting with the Me Too movement is that this questioning of, oh, was I wrong, da 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 da. When you look at what the cases are actually about, most men don't do that in public or private. You're not going to call a woman into your office and then masturbate into a palm tree. You're not going to do that. Most men don't do that. That is the actual cases with the Me Too movement, right? Mm-hmm. And then also talking about not necessarily, it was pointing out not necessarily that men were being aggressive and assaulting, but that men in general were acting on the idea that a woman derives all of her worth from the male gaze. And so when you talk about, you know, walking down the street and the man like, smile now, why you can't smile? What I smiling for? I have emotions, I have a life, I don't feel like smiling, I'm not going to smile. But the smile would be pleasing to you, so you feel the right to tell me I need to smile, right? We don't do that to men. We don't see men walking down the road, he frowning, thinking something. Go smile now, you look better if you smile. We don't do that. It's a different job. Well, we never, yeah, well, now if you do that, you might get shot, but it's not something that we would think of doing, right? You'll probably watch him and go, man, me know what's going on in his head now, let me not bother him. But that kind of thought process doesn't apply, and not just in Trinidad. So this is an international thing. So those are the complaints, right? So it's not all of a sudden you can't hug a woman. It's not all of a sudden you can't crack dirty jokes. Um, Matter of fact, she would if she doesn't tell you, hey, may I like that joke, no?
But this is where I would disagree, because I think some of the cases where men pay the price. So this gentleman, ex-senator now, comedian.
Yeah. I found that one was excessive.
Yeah.
It was
But
a poor taste. It was a badly done joke. It was in poor taste, right? And it warranted an apology,
yes.
not
Yeah.
necessarily being drummed out of the city. But he took it on himself to withdraw
Well,
from it.
well, because that is where the politics was at the time, right? And
Yeah.
being a Democrat, right? And again, people kind of overreacting, right? Because well, and Democrats always seem to be more interested in doing whatever they think this invisible line is, but that's a different thing. And the comedian dude, the Indian dude, right, who went on a date, well, that turned out to be nothing, but the woman tried to make it something.
Mm.
And then I don't know if you're familiar with that one. They went on a
Yeah.
date, right? And then even women came out and say, "Well, I don't understand, why is the complaint here? Because all you went on a date and both of you doing a thing, you wouldn't like." So I can't remember the exact details, but even women come out and were like, "Yo,
Yeah, she felt she didn't want to. She didn't want to, but she felt she had to because she owed him something.
some kind of thing, right?"
And so the deeper, instead of getting caught up with the he said, she said, the deeper issue there again goes back to what are the expectations, the societal expectations of of each gender. And we don't talk about, so the Me Too, and that's kind of where Me Too, the movement actually started. And then it was co-opted by rich white ladies. Because Me Too was founded by a Black woman.
Yes.
Talking about these microaggressions that women face every day, some of the obstacles you have. So,
And that was 10 years before it came into the thing, right? That
yeah,
was 2007, 2006.
yes. And then it got taken over.
Alicia Milano, when she had the whole Harvey Weinstein thing, and it starts from there.
Yes. So, I mean, it's interesting. The Me Too is an example of appropriation.
Yeah.
Um, and it happens all the time. So we never get to the deeper conversations about why do we think it is acceptable, or why do men think it's acceptable? Well, some women think it's acceptable too. That a woman must always be smiling and happy and not show her true emotions.
Yeah. But in the case of a carnival, though, right, where it is the very nature of the carnival and sex and sexuality, the way it is displayed.
Festival.
Right, yeah. So, but like I say, when I have this discussion with you, I feel like, yeah, no, I'm talking about here. Talking about masculinity, gender, these are things I have to know, really delve into. Now, I think it's an interesting topic. But just when he spoke about Robin Imam Shaw, when he did his thesis, like, yeah, that he was in knee deep and recorded. It makes sense for him, right? Funny enough, when I started hearing all these Zessa songs, right, I started to ask myself the question, hey, are the Zessa artists now the new Calypsonians, right? Coming from, the same societal grouping, right? The outcast, the underprivileged, the criminal element, right? The style of the music and the song is totally different, but where they're coming from and the role that they're playing, is it not similar to that of the Calypsonians?
That's an interesting question, because I mean, let me state up front, honestly, I don't really listen to it because I don't understand it much. but I have the same reaction to it as I do to gangster rap. So that might be my bias. But there's a fine line when gangster rap, because gangster rap is named in the 90s, but it's around from inception. But there was a different moral, right? So when you hear songs like The Flash, Don't Push Me because I'm close to the edge, and he's talking about this hard life,
Yeah.
right, in the city, and the violence he sees and all that, and he is close to exploding, so don't push him. But the message is different. It's not glorifying, well, I'm going to shoot you and I'm a gangster, da 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 da. Right? It's actually painting a different message. And when you listen to some of the early gangster, like Ghostface Killer has a song, I can't believe I just killed a man. And on the surface, if you don't really pay attention, it sounds like, he's glorifying being a gangster and look at me, I just kill him. But he's really talking about how the hell did I get into this life? And how do I get out? So again, a different moral, this is what I'm really living, and this is how I want to get out. Um, the I have to listen to it more. So this is just really knee-jerk reaction. But what I hear, 90% of when you do hear a Zessa song, it's not I need to get out. It's not how did I end up here. It is the latter part of gangster rap where they start to glorify I'm a gangster. I sell millions of kilos of coke, man. I could do this, da 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 da. So none that is not an inauthentic experience, but it isn't tempered with a social consciousness per se. And I find Calypso, even when he's talking about the chants that you would like Congo Bar and stuff, there's a social consciousness embedded. This is my plight, but wake up society, now we do something. So I don't know. I'd have to listen, I'd have to bite the bullet and actually listen to.
So that's one thing I thought about. But then Adiza, he's doing a topic. His topic is Zesta Music and Carnival, right? And I mean, I know two students can have similar topics, right? But so that's something I thought about. And then even when I was doing the whole paper did for you when I started the local content, a moral imperative, I think that was, and I think because I got a fair amount of pushback from Tony Solomon when I was talking to him about that. He clearly is not in the camp of giving local music any kind of I'm like he and Paul Richards, and although both of them now aren't on speaking terms, but they both push back on that concept from two different, well, similar. There were some similarities in their points, right? So I thought, that. But then I end up with this topic here now on masculinity and kind of like, I think, Neil, are you like, you're not a sociologist, you know what I mean? Like, what are you getting yourself into here?
Oh, but from a cultural studies perspective, is something you can do.
Yes, yes.
Looking
I
at
guess I'm really kind of scared here because it's I go into an area which I feel I don't have any expertise. I have notions and my thing, but then I feel like I'm talking about music. Oh, who's that?
Stuart Hall.
Mm-hmm.
I know one of the disadvantages or one of the missteps that I made with the writing, the academic writing, is that I didn't go in depth into actual cultural studies practices. Right? Partly because everything we're doing in this program kind of pulls out of cultural studies. We're looking at a cultural product, which is carnival, and we want to investigate how it impacts, how it relates to socio-political situation, economic situation, and so on. So if we were extremely Marxist, we say economic, the economic history of carnival, that kind of thing. But these are the things we look at. Very simply, cultural studies is looking at the relationship between cultural practices and deeper societal structures, especially power structures, right? So if we are looking at masculinity in carnival, and is a very interesting because carnival, at least one of the claims they make of carnival has always been a feminine space.
Mm.
It has always been, in terms of um you will talk about, for example, the Jamet Carnival. So it was the women who would spur on the stick fighters to do things and fight battles, right? So there was always a level, there was always at least an equity. And then by the 1980s, the majority of masqueraders seemed to be women.
Mm.
So you just have bands and bands of women masquerading, right? Um, and so in some sense, we recognize carnival as this kind of feminine space. Even if you want to talk about ritualistically, when you have something like a Dame Lorraine, which descends from the Glade Masquerade, and the Glade Masquerade is a celebration of divine motherhood and womanhood, and the divine mother would come and rebalance society. So even in that metaphysical idea, carnival was thought of as is thought of as a feminine space. So what does it mean then in the Western conception of masculine and feminine? Because in the West African conception, especially Europe is a big influence. Idea is always getting to balance. So the whole transvestitism, for example, that used to go on was because we wanted to balance male and female energy, right? Um, and so it's an interesting investigation coming out of the cultural understanding, the ideologies, the philosophies that would underpin our practices in carnival. How do we shape masculinity? And we see two distinct cultural ideas functioning here because the masculinity that we were shaping was a very Eurocentric idea.
Mm.
Head of the household. Um, and though, yes, in African cultures, the man is the head of the household. He's the head of the household, but the woman goes out and she makes her own money and she makes some of her own decisions. And, you know, there's a separation of duty by gender, but not in any sense that the woman cannot be a public figure,
Mm-hmm.
which is the main difference. And so in Carnival, the woman is very much a public figure, down to the fact that she has no clothes. She's a very, very public figure. But you have chafing against that, the more European idea of the woman should be indoors, man controls everything. So it's an interesting dynamic. And what does that mean now that the world is shifting and that Western idea, that Western hierarchy is being dismantled and being now carnival is a contested space for that dismantling. But it's up to you. If you, I'm not sure. I would, if you're doing your personal experiences as a producer, so what would you look at?
Good question. I mean, you know what? We just talk about this topic a little bit here, and I kind of know why I want to do it, but I just thinking, like, I don't know. I want more. I want. Can I make my people matter, right?
Mm.
Because I feel I can get into the whole just a thing and that question I pose, or even the music and it being a cultural imperative. You know, maybe I just doubted myself that I can make it a people that is worth reading now. Because I feel like if I sign up on, I just feel like I sign up on less right now. Like if I talk about music, I sign up on more and know that I have this topic. And you know what? This started way back in the class when we did academic writing. I did the feminist, the gender reading of Dragon Can Dance, because and the idea of um applying different theory to a single scenario never occurred to me before that class, right? That if you know, if you have a Marxist perspective, you see things this way. If you are feminist, you see this way, and so on. So so that attempt in the Javancan dance writing from that gender theory point of view was my first in having thinking in that way, thinking through this lens, right?
Mm.
And also Dr. Liverpool said something in one of our lectures too about like people shy away from these type of topics, right? You know, slavery, Africanisms, and carnival. That is what you have. But so I felt like going this way would be different for what most kind of an expected topic.
Mm.
And even for me, a producer, like clearly, okay, let's guess what Neil Burner's going to write. Oh, something about the music. That's like we didn't see that coming, right? Something about the music, right? So I felt that doing this would stretch me further and cause me to, delve into areas which I feel I have no real expertise or knowledge, right?
Well, that's what the research will help you gather.
Mm.
If you're looking at masculinity post Me Too, and we're talking about carnival. Carnival is a a three-part composite cultural product. So there are cultural products within the cultural product that you could, So if you're talking about carnival on the whole, we can look at um, Me Too and Masquerade, Me Too and you can narrow it down to soca, and well, I won't say Me Too and Pan. So let's say Me Too and Masquerade and Me Too and music, right? Um, Kai Miller has a collection of essays coming out. I think it's supposed to come out next year.
Who?
Kai Miller. He's a poet, professor, essayist, novelist. He's right. Let me just say he's right all kind of thing, right? But he has an essay. He used he it was his opening address for Carrie Festa last year. And one of the interesting points in it is that, Carnival as a site of rebellion. And who's rebelling now? And looking at Carnival in Jamaica, because, well, he's Jamaican, right? And talking about there was an instance, I think a couple years ago, where the street boys in Kingston completely took over one of the parades and had that moment of rebellion and self-expression. So we're talking about rebellion in the sense of self-identification, self-expression, making the invisible visible, right? Not to be confused with a political rebellion where you try to overthrow the government. This is politics small p in terms of identity. And so these boys who happen to be, if not completely, they're homosexual or homosexual adjacent for money, right? Some are kicked out, they were kicked out of their homes because they were homosexual. Some, right, were in that lifestyle because that's the only way they can make money. And so, of course, they were doubly ostracized in Jamaican society because of their sexual orientation and the fact that they're living on the street. So that they took over with, and I think, if I remember correctly from hearing the speech, with Bottle and Stone, they took over that part of Carnival and embraced that rebellion and that celebration. And look at me, here I am, I'm alive, I am visible, you have to see me, right? So even in terms of rebellion, gender rebellion like that, because this is a different orientation. They would have been in the ancient world, that's a third gender actually. If you're Native American, you're a person with two spirits. I forget there was an actual name for them in India. They were a class unto themselves. So you have even gender playing in that way. And I've seen other presentations of the ability to claim a space for it, the homosexual's ability to claim a space for himself. They usually focus on the men, I don't know why, but to claim a space for himself in the carnival setting, they have their own fete, they have their own, and this is few times where they feel completely liberated in their self-expression. So the idea of masculinity in carnival becomes very complex when you start adding these other taboo things, right? And how they make inroads. So you have the traditional binary male female, but then within the male, you have a secondary binary of heterosexual and homosexual. The binary is in the women too, but apparently nobody really cares. We don't investigate it that much. I don't know why. Right. So you can look at, if you were going to do this, you would look at how gender functions and the contestations of gender in masquerading and the contestations of gender in lyrics, right? So you had around the time of the Me Too, you had that Destra. It was Destran who was a duet, and she said you have permission.
But that wasn't happy, you know. That was
No, it wasn't Nappy. Was it from Nappy? But you know this song, right? Like we broke up a long time ago, but tonight you have permission to do
yeah,
whatever.
that's happy. Yeah. But
So
then yeah. Technically.
technically, yes. Right. So you had that issue cropping up there. Right. You have songs earlier on like Focused, which is a problematic female anthem if you ask me, because it's reinscribing the importance of the male gaze, but that's you know.
Well, it's not a valid thing because some women, you know, get the validation through the male gaze, you know.
Yeah, but
And
if you're talking about um rebellion or shifting or rearranging, revising, it doesn't.
no,
That's why
but
it's problematic.
that not everybody into that though. Some women are very comfortable with.
So no, not that it's not comfortable, but then it's difficult to call it a female empowering anthem.
Well, it depends. Dr. Francis, because you know, some women are very comfortable with attracting the male gaze and being defined through a man's appreciation, right?
Because you're comfortable with it doesn't mean it's not problematic.
I'm not saying that
So
problematic, but
remember,
you see,
one of the basic concepts is the oppressed is usually the greatest supporter of oppression.
well then, if the oppressed is comfortable with being oppressed, is there oppression?
Yes, it's still oppression, but because of your ideological positioning, you're trained to not think of it as oppression. It gets rather
No,
like
I don't know, Dr. Francis, because you can. Is oppression only if you see it as oppression, and you have to be educated into that. If you're comfortable, right? If your wife, you're married, your husband is the head of the household, your husband giving you money, he's treating you good. He don't beat you, right? You go on vacations, you know, babe, you know, I'm going with so many girls. Fine. I mean, because he is, he doesn't have a problem with you going out or whatever you're doing. Is he controlling you? Or because
that's if you're boiling it down to that specific level of interaction, that's not necessarily oppression. But then as
but an independent woman,
herself in another life.
sorry, ma'am?
Does she have envisioned herself in another life?
Sure, well, she might not have, but I'm saying to her friends, they might observe her life with her husband, who gives her everything, who she checks in with before she does something, that they might consider being oppressive. Why can't you just do
Not
something? Why do you have to tell your husband?
as you see, on that level, well, we go back to the main idea is that you choose, you have a choice. You know there's a choice, and you make your choice. If that is what you choose, that's fine. If that is what you don't choose, it should not be a problem. However, if you watch any rom-com, doesn't even have to be a rom-com, you watch any movie, if the woman chooses a single life, chooses her career over getting married and having a family, it's the problem of the movie.
If that is where the movie coming from,
That's every movie.
that's
Show
the
me
fact
a
that
movie
every is a
where
struggle to.
show me a movie where the woman is successful, top of her game, and then she has a happy ending without getting married or meeting a man.
I'm pretty sure I can find that for you, you know.
No.
I'm pretty sure I can find a rom-com where the happy ending isn't the girl gets the guy or the guy gets the girl. But isn't that also the premise for a rom-com, right? I mean, horror is supposed to make you scared.
But
Romantic comedies, right, deal with
but
whatever that popular notion of romance is.
it's such a prominent, so it's never the flip though. It's hardly ever the flip.
I don't know. I have to do. I can't say it off the top of my head, but
There's a very, and if you even outside of romantic comedies, it's in drama as well. It's in TV shows. It's in songs. It's in comic books. Right? There's a pervasive message. I don't care how successful the woman is, and if she has satisfaction with being a successful career person, she's incomplete because she is not. And there's an actual history of where these things come from. So if you go back, Victorian would be what, 200 years now? Wow, we have advanced. 150 years, something like that, right? If you go back to the turn in the 19th century, height of the, or before, Victorian era is very long. It's from 1823 something there to 1901 or something like that, 1900 something so, right? I usually count the Edwardian era in with the Victorian era because it was not that big of a cultural shift between the two. Back then, a woman had no right to property. She was only valuable as a daughter or a wife.
right.
This was the mainstay, the ideology. So by the time the 1940s roll around, where and let me be frank, we're talking about white women. We ain't talking about black women. We're talking about white women. By the time the 1940s roll around and World War II, and rather than hire black men to fill white men's spaces, they hired women, right? She gets a taste of, in the white woman gets a taste of independence. And again, really, we're talking about middle class, not the lower, not the working class. The working class white women were working.
Right.
So we're talking about even from lower middle class right up. They suddenly get a taste of going in the factories, working, making their own money, making their own decision, right? And then you start to see a rise in these romantic movies. By the time you hit 1980, one of the standouts is a movie with Diane Keaton, for example, where she's a top ad exec, having a life, living in town. She has her own penthouse apartment. She's the top of her game. And then a relative dies and she becomes the guardian of a baby. And then shifts her entire life and suddenly finds out she's happy living in a small town with a baby and a new husband. Right? So you start to see an uptick in these kind of movies, trying to maintain an older cultural norm where the woman is worthwhile if she's attached to. I remember I had this discussion about why virginity was important economically, and the man got vexed and walked out on me. But back in the day, that was the only way you could make sure that your firstborn was yours,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
right? And
Hmm,
so
good point.
there's a concept in cultural studies about, I'm not going to say it correctly, but there are three phases of culture. There's emerging culture, there's dominant culture, and then there's remnants of, right? And it sounds like we separate them, but they all coexist at the same time. And they're all in shifting relationships. And so what we find embedded in our cultural practices are remnants of an older cultural practice, an ideology that we do not question. We just inherited, we keep going, we keep reshaping and keep using, whether it matches what we need right now or not. We don't question it, right? Um, Part of your investigation then is questioning the old formulation of masculinity and how is it forcing to change, and how do we see that filtering into cultural practices now?
The first thing is even finding a definition of masculinity, because masculinity it have all different kind of, right.
Mm,
So of course I have to narrow it down to this is to masculinity in carnival. Like, what does that mean in the context of carnival? Because I realize I'm in trouble already just talking about masculinity. Masculinity as just masculinity are problems, right? Because they have numerous um takes on it, right? This lady who well, she, interestingly enough, she's a lady now, but she started off as a man. um Carol, Australian, what is her first name again? Renway or Rewin
mm.
Carroll, who was originally Richard Carroll, and her work is considered the I guess the most, how do I put it?
So the seminal text
Yes,
is
right.
something everybody refers to.
Yeah, right. But then there's so many different ways it went after her. But so it doesn't define masculinity in because it's a carnival and what that means, right? Yeah, and how to do that? What even is that, right?
Mm.
Because the masculinity, when we think of masculinity in carnival, I think of men, parading their bodies, right? And if imposing their physical presence, and you know, and I struggling to find, like, how do I define that, right? And then what source material is there to help me?
But strangely, when I think of, well, the first place I go when I think of masculinity in carnival is Aldrich and Fisheye. And those are two
Ah,
examples of
well, no, interesting
masculine
enough, right?
construction in the Caribbean.
One of the so in the same lady here, one of her of her so there's something referred to as the traditional masculinity, right? Often understood as patriarchal and perhaps violent, right? Then the modern masculinity, often understood as more expressive, egalitarian, and peaceable. That is by Ms. Rewin Cornell, right? You see me that spoke about. And I thought, yes, violence and masculinity, definitely, right? Because that's when with men impose their will, or even amongst other men. Even forget women, the men amongst men, the biggest man I got coffee down, right? And then with the woman, well, all men are more masculine generally than any woman, right? Because any man will cut down any woman, right? Generally thinking about it. But in the modern sense, yes, I can see where men, yes, you have to show your feminine side, right? You have to be able to use words to deal with a situation as opposed to violence, right? So I felt that those two very broad kind of definitions, I can see how it makes sense in how men used to behave, cuff down everything, beat anything that you want to get to understand your position, beat it up. And then you have now where, even with regards to how you handle domestic situations, how do you resolve an argument with your wife or your girlfriend? Even among men, we encourage the men now to intervene, right? You cannot, you can't beat your wife, right? You can't beat your wife, so she's to see your point of view. That is just, we're not doing that no more, right? That's not a thing anymore, and we expect all men to get on board with that. We ain't beating a woman no more, right? Yeah. So anyway, I just feel like if when I talk about this, I'm feeling like if I need to. Yeah, and then when you just talk about the things that I never thought about, right? Male and female, and then the not by bifurcation, but
Male is then split between hetero and homosexual.
yes,
Yes.
yes,
So
right?
heteronormative no, homonormative is not the word. Heteronormative is the word. There's no opposite to heteronormative. But the idea then, because as in the Caribbean, this is a complicated process in establishing masculinity, because you cannot, because of the fundamentalism ingrained in a lot of the Christian practices, you cannot, that keeps men from being emotional creatures, because any emotion, people say, well, I'm a gay kind of thing.
Yeah, well, but no, you can't do that no more, right? You can't say that no more. You can't use gay as a slur anymore. I mean, an informed person would not.
No, but it's not 100% taboo just yet in the Caribbean. Look how with the quote unquote scandal, the Pope say we should have same-sex marriage.
Yeah.
And the Caribbean Archdiocese is responding in retaliation. They know that can happen. Because the fundamentalism here, very complex. And I can say this, but I haven't done research. This is purely, again, observational. But looking at our history, there were several naturally emasculating circumstances, right? So as a slave, you were not allowed to choose who you wanted to choose to marry. You couldn't protect the woman you love. You couldn't protect your children. So the very basic concepts of what a man does in a relationship were left unfulfilled, right? You add on top of that, after emancipation, the idea that a man must have money, right? So our society was stratified by race and stratified by class. And class, of course, is determined by how much cash in your pocket. So Black men needed to find a different way to assert masculinity. And so they became even more guarded about doing quote unquote feminine things, like showing, like you talk about the old patriarchy. So showing emotion, showing any kind of softness, weakness. That became a no-no, because the only way to assert your masculinity was to have overly masculine traits, right? So the ability to fight or protect, the ability to be stoic, emotionless, blah, blah, blah. These become even more important. And when we add to that a fundamentalist interpretation of the Old Testament, right? That again goes hand in hand with us acquiring Christianity and trying to shape a masculine identity. Then not just crossing over into the feminine if you are overly emotional, but then you're actually crossing over into a biblical aberration. So all that gets invested in how we construct masculinity in the Caribbean. So the caution I would give you is that even though you pull from the major theorists, movers and shakers in gender studies, in the back of your mind know that there's a historical specificity that you need to add that will temper the constructions they're talking about, because it is not simply and it's not to say that this might not exist in if we look at especially because it's a class thing. So if you look at a racially homogenous country, you will see these same fundamentalisms and grasping to it. Because again, if you tie what's in your pocket to you being called a man, if you have to find an alternative for building that masculine identity, then you're going to hyper masculinize yourself, which is not a word, but you understand. Mm-hmm. You will take those traits and you will amp it up, right? So and well, we're dealing with masculine, so we don't really have to talk about the feminine. Feminine has a little, because they can be whatever the masculine is not. So, but then you go to the other extreme where people who can't mash ants, let me put it out. Right? So that hyper feminization. So that hyper masculinity. And I think Eldridge Cleaver is though he's one of those people who makes the weird claim that homosexuality was introduced to the black man because of slavery. No, I'm pretty sure there were homosexuals in Africa. Just, I'm just saying. Statistically, it's impossible to say that they were always heterosexual, right? But in Soul and Ice, he talks a little bit about that masculine construction. He draws from Calvin C. Herndon, who also talks about black masculine construction. Herndon kind of does it from a somewhat Marxist perspective. So you'd have to do a little more digging, looking for things that are closer to our historical reality. Just applying, because HER2 models is a big gray area in between there, between egalitarian modern man and patriarchal old-fashioned man. There's a big area in between there because it's still in flux. Right? You still have, I'll say still in flux because you still see these tropes in our modern storytelling in movies and so on. So you still see the superhero trope of the hyper masculine male, all muscle, but then also all intelligent, fighting battles and saving the day. You still see that trope. So that patriarchal idea has not completely gone away. It's very interesting. I say step outside here. You might think you're stepping outside your comfort zone, but it might be your comfort zone. Just,
Oh, God. I swear, I don't know how I end up in this. I'm a musician. I play music.
You're a human with a brain.
Huh?
You're a human with a brain.
Apparently.
That's how you end up here. But a desire to learn the deeper workings of society. And again, it's not necessary that we will get everybody to think about these things. I like I don't go a whole 80-20, but if we have enough of a percentage of people who actually consider these things and can be called upon when policies are being made or major decisions, we'll be in a relatively safe space. We don't want to be like the current White House where you just get rid of all the experts and do whatever the hell you feel. We need experts.
Yeah.
So so I would say play around with it. what you could do is write down all the ideas you have for your thesis,
Mm.
write them down, and under each one jot why would this study be significant? Why would someone be interested in?
Well, I'm already working on the introduction to this, right? This is my first draft, which led to my evisceration, um, which maybe is why I'm feeling a little more shaky now, right?
Mm.
But you know, but I think so. I really believe we have to re-educate our young men. I think our young men are really just very fragile, and even their ideas of what masculinity is, right? And I see it from some young boys around here, the way they interact with young girls, and from my experience, right? I grew up. One of my good partners, Ming, you might know him, Michael Ochitom. So his parents were both doctors, right? My father was a government printer, my mother was a seamstress. I didn't have his social kind of upbringing, right? And I remember seeing him. If he would buy flowers for his girlfriend and send them, and it never occurred to me to send flowers
Mm.
to a young lady, right? I listened to him talk. He would call her during the day, see what you doing, and like, what's kind of weird, this caller, like, and honestly, from him I learned like how to be a little softer, right? Like it's not a brown kind of everything not meet as a UJ, right? And I can hear now with some of the youngsters, they don't have that. I remember over here some young women talking about, having intimate interaction with a young girl, and the guy was complaining she want to cuddle. She want to cuddle after. What the fuck wrong with you, boy? She want to cuddle. Right? And these guys were like, wow, these guys are worse than dinosaurs. Like, cuddling is supposed to be natural. So first of all, why would you make love to a woman who you don't want to cuddle with in the first place, right? And he was like, she want to cuddle, boy. What's wrong with you, boy? She want to cuddle. Like, Jesus Christ, right? And I really feel genuinely that yeah, we need to re-educate our men, right? And so I feel like I know where I want to go with it.
Mm.
I just I don't the process of getting there in an academic framework is the challenge, right? I feel like I could argue on the block. I feel like I argue on the block at this point, right? But having to sit and convince a panel of your peers is where I feel like I don't want to expose myself and get licks now.
First thing, um, and I only came to this realization this year, or y'all don't write a proposal.
Mm.
You'll go straight into the thesis, right? And that's what's happening. You're writing the introduction.
Yeah.
Introduction is the hardest thing to write. 9 out of 10 times you write the introduction after you write everything else.
Mm.
Um, well, halfway you revise your introduction.
Well, Dr. Liverpool said that you revise as you go along, but we're trying to get the framework, I guess.
So, because typically what would happen is your prospectus becomes your introduction. So in the prospectus, this is what I want to investigate. This is what I want to find. This is the background to what I'm talking about, and this is what I plan to do. And that then generally shapes an introduction. So when you're reading most of the books, that's what an introduction does for a larger work. It tells you, okay, well then, and then I'm going to do this in this chapter, and this in this chapter, and this in this chapter. So I would recommend stepping back because and doing some of the pre-writing things, right? What is my purpose? What am I setting out to prove? How would I organize this? And build a shell so that when you actually have to write your introduction, your methodology, and so on, you kind of have a structure you could follow so that you don't get lost. right? And so it also helps in knowing exactly what questions you need to ask and what information you need to gather. So you have to know, right? I really want to look at how constructing masculinity is changing in Carnival after the Me Too era, in because of the Me Too era. So what do I need to know? I need to know how we constructed masculinity before that, right? What I need to know now is what differences are we seeing in the expressions of masculinity in Carnival post the big Me Too era, right? So how I gather information on that, right? And then based on the information you gather, you can then start to answer what is going on with masculinity in Carnival post Me Too. So knowing that hypothesis, that idea, this is what I want to find out, this is what I need to ask to find it out, this is how I'm going to go about asking it, right? And this is what, well, I can't say what the findings will be because I do your research yet.
Right.
But having that lovely framework, then that guideline that you could follow helps. Right. I remember I had to write the outline for my dissertation ended up being 3 pages long because it was a dissertation. But it helped because I did the bad thing. I just think I had the prospectus. It was approved. Then it took about 10 months, and then all of a sudden, I'd say in the space of like 3 weeks to a month, I wrote a dissertation. It just came out. Blah. It was a hot, messy first draft because I mean the information was there, but the information wasn't organized in a way that people could understand.
Right.
It was really just all that was in here that I had been researching, right? And so I had to write an outline to actually get to organize the information, how this information should develop. And so start with that. Start with jotting down, this is what I want to find out, this is what I want to do, this is, kind of who's influencing how I'm thinking, so that go see a lit review. Jot that down so that even if you're doing the introduction, the methodology, whatever, there's a purpose behind it. You know what you're doing. You kind of know where you want to go. So that will help. Introduction is the hardest thing to write.
Thanks for telling me. I feel better now. Well, thank you very much. I know this wasn't all on topic, but I appreciate it.
Generally on topic. This is what happens when there's one person in the classroom. The topic is the conversation.
No, I have to say, right, Dr. Francis, I feel very lucky that I get to have you one-on-one. I really do. I think generally in this small group of us, I really appreciate that. For me, that we can get more time with the lecturers. If it was like 15 to 20 people, I don't know how that would be. But I'm really appreciative of the fact that I could get to spend this time with you and your mind.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
Right. So yes.
So if I had to record, do you record these things, right?
Yes.
Okay. Is it mandatory?
I record all the sessions. Okay, well, I mean, I only have one student, so if you miss the class, there's no class. But it's so for you to be able to review or go back. God, we talk about this in class, and I can't remember what it is, so you can actually watch it and find.
Okay. So all right, so then I should be recording or
I'll post it on I'll post it on Canvas.
Okay, on Canvas.
Yes, but if you want to record I think you have to ask permission to.
I can. You'll have to give me permission. I think.
Yes.
I think if I record here, it'll say permission. Yeah, something about, and then you will say record. Yeah.
Right. So.
Okay. Okay. So when you say post on Canvas, you post on Canvas for everybody to see, or post on Canvas so that I can access it.
For you, is in the class.
Oh, in the class. Okay, right.
So when you go to fundamentals, it's in the class in the modules. Okay. Only you can access it because only you have registered for it.
Nice. Okay. Cool.
Right.
All right. So I will keep going. Thing is, I keep I know I end up in trouble there because I having to juggle everybody and I'm trying to like I say, being here by myself will be a challenge sometimes and keeping myself going. But I have to do better until keep up with everybody's work and hit on my mark. So I apologize for not being up to where I should be with you. Of course.
No, it is meant to be at your own pace. The only time this meeting actually class meeting is a concession from previous classes who felt they needed a class ever so often. And so I check in ever so often to make sure that you're getting along with it. But really the bulk of class meetings would be the Calypso writing workshop. And I don't know how that's going to work with just two people. It's not really a workshop.
Yeah.
Right. So that will come on probably by mid-November or so.
Just now.
Yeah, just now. After
will either be in the second term of Trump or not?
You mean, well, we'll be in a civil war regardless. I
don't know.
I halfway feel so it's going to be a civil war. There's going to be civil unrest.
I think if he loses, I think some amount of people will want to have a quicker transition. Because I think that'd be necessary. I can't imagine the benefits of him being in charge for another month and change.
Let me stop recording.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Just in case.
Yeah.
Class is officially over, so I'll